Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Workplace Wanderer, Lessons from the Experts. You may have noticed that there have been no new episodes for about 3 weeks now. And that was because I'm trying to practice what we preach on here when it comes to burnout and resilience and taking time for ourselves. And I realized it was time for me to take a little break. You never want something you love to become a burden. And it started to feel for a moment there that I felt like I had to do a podcast episode, and I didn't want it to feel that way. So I like to keep it fresh, and I like to enjoy this work because it's one of my favorite things that I get to do is create this podcast. I am very excited about today's guest. I think it's actually very much in line with what I just said, taking time for ourselves and some other spiritual practices, which I think is going to be really interesting to dive into. So this week, I have Lori Saitz from Zen Rabbit, and we will be discussing what the highest performing business leaders do to sharpen their leadership skills, decision-making abilities, and creativity. So Lori, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to what this conversation brings out.
We'll see where it takes us. You never
We will
know.
see.
You never know. Usually we have a topic and then all of a sudden it turns into something completely different. And that's fun. I like that.
Yes. Yeah. It'll
I
be
think you came prepared.
whatever comes out, that will be what the listeners are needing to hear.
Exactly. And love it. You got a microphone and headphones. This, like you said before we started recording, this isn't your first rodeo.
It is not.
That is awesome. So, Lori, as part of the podcast and something that I do on every episode is, we always have a guest on who is an expert in different areas that are workplace related. And I always ask our guests to introduce themselves, to give their own bio. And as mentioned many times on the podcast, the point of this is to be more inclusive and to allow people to express themselves in whichever way that they feel they are today. And we all write these professional bios, and sometimes they don't feel like us when we have to read them or someone else reads them. So I would love for you to introduce yourself, give us a little background, and tell us how you got here.
Yeah, and that's a whole other topic, and maybe we'll get into it, but about
Okay.
being who you are, at like being that same person all the way 360 degrees. And so not having to feel like you're not that you're playing a role that doesn't feel comfortable.
Right.
But yeah, so I would say I'm the founder and CEO of Zen Rabbit, and I host a podcast called Fine is a Four-Letter Word. And I am on a mission to teach the world to be calm and grounded no matter what's going on around them in their life.
I love that. Clear, concise, direct. That is something that I am working on that I probably can use your help with, honestly, is when people ask me, what do you do? I've got a long answer for them. And so I'm
Yeah.
going to work on being more like Lori and be more concise and give you a direct answer to what
I would be happy to help you with that. So what I didn't in that short, concise thing, I did not say I have many, many, many years of marketing in my background.
Okay. Well, that makes sense then, because it sounds great. I love everything you just said. And so, what does that mean for you? The type of work do you do? Give us some examples of what that looks like, and what type of organization or leader may reach out to you, and what are they looking for help with?
Yeah. So, I mean, the formal way I describe my company is it's a forward thinking health and wellness company.
Hmm.
And I'm working with business leaders to help them create a more, a healthier, more productive work environment, um, and help them implement programs that improve the well being of their teams. But that sounds kind of woo woo. And we can talk about that in a second, like that whole term.
Mm-hmm.
But what ultimately it's doing is contributing to their bottom line because it's helping them with productivity and performance and retention and what's the other word I'm looking for? Engagement.
Yes. And that all makes so much sense. And, to me, I guess it depends who you're speaking to, whether that sounds woo woo or not. You know,
Well,
to me,
the
it doesn't
tools
sound
and
woo woo.
techniques I use might sound woo woo, but the thing is, there's piles of research and science behind
Mm-hmm.
it. And when you look at the highest performing business leaders in the world, the majority of them practice these techniques and these practices. So it kind of makes you look at it and go, well, if they're doing it, why isn't everybody doing it?
I completely agree with you, and I we're going to get into a little bit more of the specifics of some of these practices, but I also think that there are a number of simple, basic practices that people can be doing at work, but when they hear it, they hear time spent away from somebody being productive and doing their work is what they
Hmm.
hear, and I don't think they're realizing that it increases the productivity on the back end. You're helping the person be more healthy, present, authentic, and
Yes.
connected to those around them, which then improves the productivity, creativity, innovation, all that good stuff that comes along with that.
Yes, that's exactly it. And the other part of it that's interesting is that people sometimes hear these techniques and they're like, but that's so simple. Like, how could
Mm.
that possibly have such an effect? It's so simple.
Yeah.
Like, they want something really complicated because otherwise it won't work. But the truth is, it can be simple and work. You just have to do it.
I think people are looking for complicated because they think that's more expensive.
Hmm.
And they think if they
Or,
spend more, then that means it's worth more.
yeah, or complicated is better, which is
Right.
actually I have been finding more and more that the opposite is true.
Hmm.
Like like a lot of people talk about Apple and like I'm not a whole like total groupie in that world. I do have an iPhone, but I don't have the rest of the platform. But people like it was introduced to the world and people gravitated toward it because it was so simple to use.
Right. Exactly. I think people crave simplicity, but they don't want it when they're in the workplace for some reason, or the people they're bringing experts into the workplace. They don't want simplicity because then they feel like they could do it themselves. And why pay somebody to do
Right.
something simple, which is it's so backwards because sometimes those simple practices are really difficult to
Yeah.
learn and to enact in your day-to-day life.
Right. Right. Exactly. And it comes down to consistency. It's like getting in
Mm.
shape is really not that hard. They're pretty simple things to do. You just have to do them consistently.
Right. Right. That it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. Like people need that accountability. That's why people get trainers sometimes, even if you know how to
Hmm.
work out, you get a
Yep.
trainer because you need somebody to make sure you're showing up every day or
Right.
every other day,
Right.
whatever.
Exactly. That's
Yeah,
exactly it. So,
it's funny reading through so much of the research. As we discussed, and I feel like I talk about this ad nauseum on the podcast, but it's a big part of my life. I am currently getting a doctorate in organizational psych, and so much of what we discuss is employee wellness
hmm,
and communication styles and ways to keep productivity up. And it does often come back to the simple practices, uh, but they're always blanketed and designed in these research articles I'll read in this such a complicated, crazy way. And then the professors are like, synthesize that for me. What were they telling you from that research article? I'm like, they were telling you to meditate. Like
right.
it wasn't that complicated. There was 45 pages there that were basically just saying meditate in a really complicated way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I,
And that's the practice that I was referring to that the highest performing business leaders are using is
yeah.
meditation. Because it it one can if you I mean, there's really no bad time of day. Like people ask me all the time, what's the best time of day to meditate? Whatever time is you're gonna do it is the best time. Personally, I do it in the morning because I like to be able to set my intention. I like to be able to start my day that way. But it really doesn't matter.
Right.
It's the fact of doing it. And I have a whole thing I talk about all the myths and misconceptions around why people, around meditation and why people don't do it because they think they have to sit for an hour a day on a mat with their legs crossed and in complete silence with no thoughts flowing through their head. And they're like, well, I can't do that, so I'm out. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a form of meditation, but there are so many other ways to do it that they don't know about or that they don't think of as meditation. Like gardening could be considered meditation, but people don't think. So they like throw away the practice because they don't think they can do it.
It's almost as if meditation is a stigmatized term. Where,
Hmm.
we sort of relate a very specific image to meditation, and if it doesn't fit how we see ourselves in the world, then we're not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, like so many benefits, like you were talking about, like meditation, I mean, it changes the brain chemistry. It changes the wiring of your brain. Like it physically changes how your brain is wired.
Wow.
Mm,
You know,
yeah.
it makes so much sense. And I can tell you that the times of my life, regardless of what's going on, the best times in my life where I feel the most at peace, the most present, are the times where I'm meditating 3 to 4 times a week.
Mhm.
And whenever
Mhm.
I let go of that practice, which is a weird, it's like that medication phenomenon where you take a medication and you feel better. So then you stop taking the medication
Yes.
and all of a sudden you feel sick again and you're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Um, and that happens to me constantly. Actually, this week, it's funny we were talking about this topic, is that this week I made a commitment to myself to re-engage my meditation practice and have started Monday and yesterday, and I'm trying to re-engage it and bring it back. But there is a
Yeah.
weird fight that goes on in my head.
Yes, and that happens until it doesn't. And because for years, so I was introduced to meditation when I was 10. My mom took my brother and me to a meditation course when I was 10 years old. So I
Wow.
had this as a foundation in my childhood, but then I didn't practice it for the next 30 something years.
Wow.
And like off and on I would. Like you're talking about. Like I
Right.
would do it and I'm like, I know I should be doing this. I know it's good for me. Like I know all the things about it. And then I just wouldn't do it. I do it for a week and then I'd skip 5 years. And
Hmm.
and I would even advise other people. Like I had a friend going through a divorce and she was all so stressed out. And I'm like, meditation might help you. And so she started doing it, but I still wasn't doing it myself.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
it wasn't until I finally got to the point, actually it was for me, it was shortly after my mom passed away 10 years ago. And that's when I came back to it. And for some reason, it just really, I got into it and I did it consistently. And I've been doing it almost every single day since. And it's at this point feels like if I don't do it, it's almost like leaving the house without brushing my teeth.
You just feel off.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. And what type of meditation do you do? What does it look like for you?
It looks like, so I use an app called Insight Timer.
Hmm.
And there are plenty of apps and there's lots of good ones. And I have
Yeah.
no connection to this one. I just like it. And it's free. It's called Insight Timer and there are thousands of meditations on there so you can find one that has music behind it or not music or guided or just music or 5 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. And so I usually just pick one, whatever I'm attracted to. I have some that are bookmarked that I really like, but I'll typically do 10 to 15 minutes in the morning.
Okay.
And I personally like guided even after all this time. I'm not going to sit in silence and just let thoughts run through my head. I prefer the guided and I highly recommend that, especially for people who are starting
Yeah.
because it gives you something because thoughts are going to go through your head. You are going to get carried away by thoughts. Like let's
Yes.
just start with that. That's what happens.
Hmm.
And it's the practice of bringing your mind back to the meditation teacher's voice or back to your breathing. That is part of the practice. And as you
Hmm.
do it more, maybe the time between mind wanderings gets longer. So you stay focused for a longer period of time. But no matter, like, you're still going to happen. The
Right.
interesting thing is, though, I was listening to Andrew Huberman, and he was talking about that when you are bringing your mind back in a meditation, every time you catch yourself wandering away and you come back to your breathing or back to the meditation teacher's voice, you're refocusing and refocusing and refocusing. And when you are not in meditation, you are now better at focusing and refocusing back to the
Interesting.
project at hand because you've been practicing it in meditation. And this is one of the benefits of practicing meditation in the workplace. Like the benefit that translates into the workplace is now you can be more focused, because like everybody gets distracted. Like
Right.
it just happens. So you're working on a project and then you get carried away by different thoughts, but you can come back faster if you practice meditation.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
And that is so helpful. And especially going back to the topic originally of improving productivity, you could see
Mhm.
totally how that happens. I mean, I would challenge the listeners. I wonder how many times a day do you experience where you go to start something and then you're distracted by your phone, distracted by an email that came in, you're distracted by somebody talking, and a task that should have taken an hour now has taken 2.5 hours, and you're
Yes.
losing that productivity throughout the day.
Right. And to your point that you mentioned earlier too, this is where people go, well, I don't have time to meditate. But it's like that, what was that analogy? Was it, Abraham Lincoln about if I had 4 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 3 sharpening the axe or something like that. It's the same thing. Like if you spend 15 minutes in meditation, 15 minutes a day in meditation, the stuff you're doing outside of meditation is going to take you less time. So a project that might have taken you 2 hours maybe takes you 1, I don't know. But you're so essentially you've just saved yourself 45 minutes. You spent 15 in
Right.
meditation and you get an extra 45 minutes that you weren't working on the project. Like that's how it works.
I also feel like, and I think I've specifically said this to people who told me they don't have time to meditate, is that, and maybe it's not appropriate, but I'm like, you're full of shit. Because
Yes. Yes.
that's not true. We all have 5 to 10 minutes a day. I don't
Mhm.
care when it is. And even if you have to wake up 5 to 10 minutes earlier or go to
Yeah.
bed 5 to 10 minutes later, we all have 5 to 10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably, I'm sure as you hear, and I would love to hear from you if this is accurate or not, probably the most common excuse as to why people don't meditate, right?
That one, and I can't clear the thoughts in my head, I'm not good
Mm.
at meditation because I can't sit in silence and not have
Right.
thoughts. Those are the 2 top reasons why people don't do it.
Well, it's tough, uh, because meditation's not an instant gratification tool. Maybe for a little bit, but in general, if you're just getting started, it can be a frustrating and tough process, right?
Yeah, absolutely, I don't wanna discount that, but you can actually start seeing immediate benefits. Like, you
Mm,
will sleep better, you'll start seeing and that can be within days
yeah.
that you're sleeping better. You are, your relationships improve because you are more emotionally balanced.
Mhm.
You are more creative. We already talked about being more focused. It helps your physical, like as a physical, your physical health will improve. There have been studies that show that you feel less physical pain.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess what I mean is that the practice itself can be frustrating,
Yes.
and you may not feel it in the moment, and you may end being frustrated because you couldn't focus the whole time.
Right.
But it's the showing up at day to day, that consistency that you talked about, that I imagine is the most important piece. And, encouraging people, I guess, not to give up after
Mhm.
the first
Absolutely,
week or two.
absolutely. And I would even encourage people who are just starting that you may see immediate benefits in that. Let's say you spend like you're having a really crazy stressful day and you go into your office or wherever, even the bathroom, whatever, and you
Right.
sit for 3 minutes and just focus on your breathing. Focus on the air coming into your lungs and going out
Right.
for 3 minutes and come out, you will have relaxed your entire nervous system and you will come back to something that looked like an overwhelming challenge calmer.
Yeah. Reset and refreshed.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it was interesting while I was meditating the most, and I will say that it's not like I go more than a couple weeks without doing it.
Mhm.
So it's usually, what I aim for is 3 to 5 times a week. So that's
Mhm.
really a total, if I max it out, of less than an hour a week
Mhm.
of meditation, and the benefits are huge. But when am at my best, when I find myself, you talked about the refocusing piece, the auto refocusing.
Mhm.
For me, it's actually I have an emotional response often to stimuli. So to someone's reaction, or
Mm.
especially when I was working in mental health, there's so much you hear, and a lot of emergencies, and
Yeah.
I would feel myself getting escalated, and I had to, in the beginning, remind myself, okay, take a breath, take a breath. But eventually that became automatic, where
Mhm.
it was almost like my body would switch in, and all of a sudden I'm getting escalated. I could feel myself taking the breath and letting my shoulders come down and relax.
Right.
and then I'd be back and focused. But it took a good couple months of consistent meditation to get to that point.
Yeah.
But it was really cool where I would notice myself taking these deep breaths and like breathing out the anxiety.
Yeah.
And it really, really helped
Yeah.
in
And
so many different ways.
that's where it comes back to to my mission of teaching the world, teaching people to be calm and grounded no matter what's going on around you. So we're not talking about the building is physically on fire, but it could be, and you stay calm, you stay grounded because
Yeah.
you are rooted, and that doesn't change the outside situation. It still needs to be managed and dealt with, right?
Right.
But you are able to respond instead of react.
Hmm. Yeah.
Respond like logically instead of reacting impulsively, like from the reptilian brain.
Right. So important.
Yeah.
I love that. And I imagine it helps people connect. So are you teaching teams of people to meditate?
Yeah, I'm teaching them a bunch of tools and techniques. So that's
Okay.
one
So
of them.
meditate is one. Okay.
Meditate is one of them. Yeah, and then, dispelling those myths and misconceptions around what meditation is and teaching them other ways that you could potentially be meditating that you don't even consider meditating. Like I said, like gardening or running, or it's just wherever you can go to clear your mind
Hmm.
and let that inner voice come in. And so when you mentioned spirituality in the workplace at the beginning of this, and this is where I feel like this is where it comes in. It's not anything to do with religion. It
Right.
has to do with getting in touch with your own inner voice, and whether you want to call that connection to God or spirit or inner voice, higher power, whatever it is, that's what you're doing when you're meditating. Wayne Dyer had a phrase that prayer is us talking to God, and intuition is God talking to us. And so
Mm.
again, if the term God doesn't sit with you, like change it out to whatever you want. But so much goes on outside of us, right? We have so many distractions in the world and people telling us what to think and what to do and how
Yes.
to do it. But this is the one place that allows you to get in touch with what does your inner voice, the one that only you can hear, what is that saying? Because that's never going to steer you wrong. It doesn't have an ulterior motive.
Right. You're so clearly passionate about this topic and so knowledgeable. I mean, this really must mean a lot to you. What was there a part of your life journey that brought you to a place, or maybe brought you back to meditation that you felt like, wow, this really saved me, or this really helped me. I want to share this with the world.
I mean, it was in part when my mom passed away and managing through those emotions. And if,
Mm.
somebody, you can't know what it's like to, go through the passing of, I don't even know if it's just a parent in general, but specifically a mom, until you do it. Like, it's one of those
Yeah.
things you can't know what it's like until you do it. And so I think it just helped me get into that place of, okay, I can, like, I don't want to say I can go on. Like, it's not like I was crushed, so that I couldn't get out of bed kind of thing, but some people could be to that place.
Sure. Yeah.
It just helped me find my footing and to stay calm and grounded. I consider the DC metro area like home. I went to college there. I lived there for many years. I left the area for 15 years and lived other places, and then I came back. It's a very high strung area. There are
Yeah,
a
I'm
lot of
sure. Yeah.
type people.
There's a lot of tension over there. I
Whether
don't know
you're in
why though.
politics or not, it is
Yeah.
very type A, lots of stress. I worked 90 hours this week. How many did you work? Kind of
Mm.
place. And so this is one of the tools that has helped me manage living in that kind of environment, even if I don't work in that, like I don't work in, the White House or whatever, but just being around that energy can be really difficult.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, and it's the same in any corporate environment, really. It's very like there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of stress and burnout. You hear about it all the time, and like we need to improve resilience. Well, meditation does that.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I think it was in part it was maturity in me getting older and not wanting to live that way, like hair on fire all the time.
Right.
and finding this other, going back to really this tool that I had had in the toolbox the whole time. And
I,
but I also realized that most people have never been introduced to it. And so they don't have this tool. But again, it's so simple. Let me show you.
there's a bit of, if I can just comment on this, and I know that it's something that you've had in your toolbox and I'm sure you used before, but there's such poetry in the fact that when your mom passed away, you began using it and she was the one who originally exposed you to it.
Yes. Yes, that
That's a
has been
really,
pointed out to me before because I did not see it original. I didn't see it. Someone else pointed it out to me, and
wow.
I appreciate that you picked up on that.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful full circle moment there,
Uh-huh.
and kind of
Uh-huh.
giving the gift back to the world now that
Yeah.
was given to you that's helped you so much through especially a difficult time. But
Yeah.
it does make sense what you're saying. And I'm thinking about what's the response that you get, or when you're going to an organization. I'm assuming they're aware of your services prior to bringing you in, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
What is the typical response that you get from people? Like, as if, do they feel like they don't take it seriously at first? Like, what challenge are you overcoming in the beginning? I'm curious.
Yeah. Yeah, there is some challenge in terms of acceptance of like, uh, this seems kind of woo-woo, but that's one of the things that I'm really good at is I feel like trying to like translating between the woo-woo and the practical.
Hmm.
Like I'm really good at being the interpreter between those two things. And I think it has to do with how I present it. Like I'm very approachable.
Yes.
And so I make it fun and interactive. Like I'm not the I never really want to be like a keynote speaker. I mean, if someone wants to pay me to be a keynote speaker, sure, I'll take it. But I'd rather be the interactive workshop person
Mm,
because that's I feel like how people really learn.
yeah.
And it's so much more fun. Like I
Oh,
want to have
yes.
fun doing this. This is not me preaching. This is
Hmm.
me introducing you to something that I'm so passionate about and I want to introduce like let me show you how cool it is and how much it can affect your life not just in work but at home. Like what if you went home and shared some of these things with your kids or your partner? And if you show up in a more calm and grounded way, your interpersonal relationships at work and at home improve. And now it becomes a little easier to manage those thoughts that are distracting you in your head because maybe you're being distracted by, I just had an argument with my partner before I came into work. But if your interpersonal relationship with your partner is better, you're not having that argument. So now you don't have to manage that distraction.
Yeah, it's like the chicken or the egg goes away.
Right, right,
There's no
right,
chicken or egg anymore.
right,
Uh,
right.
when you started talking and telling this, what you were just saying, there was like a sigh of relief within me, and like I just felt at peace. And part of it is because, to be honest, the reason I left the mental health field was that I felt like we were just, um, it was like whack-a-mole,
Mm,
and not to ever compare a patient to a whack-a-mole game, because everybody was great, but we were seeing the same thing over and over and over and over
hmm.
again, and treating client after client after client. And I'm realizing that there's a bigger systemic issue at play here. And for me, it was, how do we tackle the work world, which is
Hmm.
where most of us spend like 70% of our lives or something like that? How do we fix the systems within there and create healthier individuals so that they go home and create healthier individuals at home? So
Yes.
when you just said what you said, I think that's the model that makes the most sense. If workplaces can create healthier employees, they're also creating healthier parents, healthier siblings, healthier kids. I mean, really everything, because they're bringing themselves home, their work
Yeah.
selves home.
Yeah, exactly. A healthier society all around. And that's part of the reason why I am so passionate about this because I know it has the ability to change the world. And that sounds like so dramatic and giant. And it's the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally is. I mean, I agree with you completely. I think it's such an important piece that people should there should be, and it's almost like I'm imagining like how a kindergarten class has nap time. There
Yeah.
should be meditation time
Yes.
at every
Yes.
workplace. Like a bell
Yeah.
goes off and it's like,
Well,
there's no working allowed for the next 10 minutes.
oh my gosh, that would be awesome. But there are some workplaces that do have meditation rooms. There are
Meditation
some,
rooms.
yes.
I'm a believer though in, it's almost like saying my door's always open to you. It's
Yeah.
really hard for people to walk through that door. I think we
Right.
almost have to set up systems that push people
Mm-hmm.
to be able to walk through that door,
Mm-hmm.
or you walk through the door yourself. And like setting up a time for meditation where we kind of force it in whatever way you want. This
Yeah.
is a 15-minute break from work. You're not allowed to work during this time. Computers all lock.
Yeah.
Finding some
Right,
way to
right,
do that.
right. There's like block on the phone. Yeah. I love that idea, Blake. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be awesome.
If you
Yeah.
could find a way to do it, go for it.
I'm going to start thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you too, we talked about briefly as the one of the questions that you had sent actually in advance when we're discussing topics was, does spirituality have a place in the workplace?
Hmm.
And you did touch on it, of course, already. How do you make spirituality palatable in a place that seems so void of
Hmm.
spirituality? The workplace, people don't commonly associate it with that.
Right.
How do we convince people that there is an aspect of spirituality within all of our lives? It's kind of like the human condition.
Hmm.
Spirituality is part of it. So it's like, and I may not be an answer to this question, but I'm sort of thinking out loud. But I'm with you. I'm a spiritual person. I think it's important. I'm wondering how we introduce it to workplaces so that we can create that connectivity and
Hmm.
that bond amongst people. Because I think spirituality is very bonding.
I think it's a matter of first redefining what spirituality is and disconnecting it from religion,
Yeah.
because it could be, religion could be a piece of somebody's spirituality, but spirituality as a whole does not is not attached to any specific religion.
Right.
It's kind of a human, like you mentioned, a human condition. It's a humanness.
Right.
Like there is more to us than our physical body. And again, that's been proven in science as well.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, what is that other part? That's the spirit part. And like, I have my podcast is called Fine is a 4-letter word. And part of the reason I started it was because I was seeing people who would look at all of the things they had in their life externally. From the outside, it looked like they had everything going for them, but they still weren't happy. And they would think, well, there must be something wrong with me. Why
Mm.
can't I be happy with all of this? And what the piece that was missing is their soul was crying for growth. Our soul's natural condition is growth. If we're not growing, then we might as well like lie down and die. Like it's
Right.
just who we are. And so to me, spirituality is that growth, like our soul, our that deeper inside part of us that wants to grow. And whether you're working for yourself or you're working for someone else, like we all want to have an outlet for that growth, for that creativity.
Right.
And so I think when you bring that into the workplace, when you acknowledge that people want to grow and give them opportunities to do that, give them encouragement to do that, that could look like creating a safe space for people to make mistakes, for to take a risk, and maybe it'll work out and maybe it won't, but you're giving them opportunity to try something they never did before, and that fuels that growth.
Yeah, I love that. So it's basically creating a culture of spirituality without, you're not necessarily talking about spirituality, but you're creating a culture that values the principles of spirituality.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think it also goes back to tapping into your intuition. There
Yeah.
are a lot of, again, business leaders, I don't think talk about this as much because they want to be seen as making decisions based on facts
Mhm.
and research and, piles of supporting evidence. And there is also a place for, I see all of that and it just doesn't feel like the right decision right now. And trusting your gut.
Yeah.
Like there is a piece to that. And that to me is also uh, comes in under spirituality and
Yeah.
honoring, like, I know I heard what you said, but I just don't think that that's the thing. In fact, I was on a call this morning with a business leader, and he was saying that he was talking about, he was being presented with an opportunity to help the leadership within his organization. And he was saying, well, my boss thinks it's this. She thinks this is the problem. But personally, I don't think that's the problem. I think this other thing is the problem.
Hmm.
He doesn't necessarily have hard evidence to support that, but he's going with a feeling that what he's seeing and what he's feeling around him in his team, that he's more correct than she is.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, and trusting that intuition and then having the strength and fortitude to stand by it.
Yeah,
It's
right.
tough, especially if
Yeah.
not everybody around you doesn't abide by that. That's a
Yeah.
tough thing.
Yeah, and
Um,
I get that. That can be harder when you're an employee working for someone
right.
else.
But at the same time, that's where that creating a culture of that self-work, doing that work
Right.
on yourself and having a culture where everybody maybe has a coach or everybody's doing this type of work
Yeah.
and learning to understand themselves and trust their instincts and meditate and be present and mindful. I mean, doing so, it almost sounds like an ideal world,
Yeah.
having an
Yeah.
organization that has that.
Right. And when you give people the responsibility, the the trust,
Hmm.
that that encourages them, that gets them more engaged,
Right.
and it encourages them to step out and take ownership
Yeah.
of the thing, which is another thing that leaders are always like, nobody wants to take ownership of this stuff. Like, they just want somebody to tell them what to do. Well, if you create the environment for them to do that, they will.
Well, yeah, it's because you're always telling them what to do. That's why.
Right. Right.
Give them a chance to fail, give them a chance to try. That's the whole
Yeah.
point of this.
Right. And you that's where innovation happens.
Right. Yep, I agree. Innovation is like that perfect little spot of like psychological safety, a trusting environment, conflict, and having healthy conflict in the
Mhm.
workplace
Mhm.
and diversity. All
Yes.
of all of those pieces together like just create this beautiful and mindfulness and kind of
Right.
having that
Right.
culture, which I think the mindfulness or the meditation practice and the intuition piece all feed into every single aspect of what I just said. But that's where that innovation, that magic happens.
Right. Exactly. And yeah, and when you're talking about collaboration and I'm reminded of the you remember that story about the emperor has no clothes?
Yeah.
So, right. So everybody is agreeing with the leader because nobody wants to be, dissent and
Hmm.
say what they really see or what they really feel, until that one little kid is like, but he doesn't have any clothes on, you know?
Yep. Yep.
And but that's when you can really get to the heart of the problem.
Hmm.
And again, tapping into some form of spirituality helps you get to that point.
Right. Exactly. And I think the model that you have and taking this approach to organizations makes a ton of sense, and especially going after leaders first because they're the ones who are creating the culture, and
Mhm.
giving them that aha moment typically then trickles down to the rest of the staff,
Mhm.
and then allows maybe you could open up, or it opens up for you to then work with everybody else. But starting with those leaders and having leaders care about this stuff and not being too busy to take care of themselves and do this
Right.
work so that they can show up and be better is a really smart way of approaching employee wellness and approaching organizational health. So I just want to commend you on that. I think it makes a ton of sense. It's awesome.
Thank you.
So where can people find you? If they're looking for you, how can they find you?
The best place to find me, where I am most active, is on LinkedIn, where you and I met. I'm
Yep.
on LinkedIn. I've got a newsletter there. I'm posting there. That's the best place to find me. My website is zenrabbit.com. And yeah, those two places.
Awesome. So I will make sure that I post links to your website, to your LinkedIn, as well as I want to post a link to Insight Timer, maybe a few other tools
Mhm.
that people can use to meditate. I use the Calm app. I
Yep.
had gotten a free subscription to it, maybe 2, 3 years ago. And then I've paid for it ever since because it's such a good app.
It
And
is
it's
a good
very
one.
similar to Insight Timer.
Mhm.
Same type of idea.
Yeah.
And you know what it does for me, which is really smart because I think it's tapping into competitive people, is that it tracks my meditations for the week and sets goals. So it's like if I feel like if I don't hit that goal, I
Yeah.
screwed up that week. So
Yeah.
it really feeds into my childhood trauma there and make sure that
Yes.
I meet my goals.
Yes. Insight Timer has tracking too. I noticed this morning I have had 65 days in a row. So,
Oh my gosh, wow, good for
because
you.
sometimes I will just not, I'll do a meditation not on the app, but yes.
Right. Yeah, by the way, even on the app, what I've noticed, and I think it's the same for any of them, even if you just do it, there's 30-second breathing exercises, which is
Uh-huh.
how I was initially exposed to meditation
Hmm.
because I tried over and over again. And it just, for me, it was like, I can't do this. It doesn't work. I gave all the
Yeah.
excuses that you talked
Yeah.
about. And there was somebody who talked about Navy SEALs and their box breathing that they use.
Mm.
And I was like, well, Navy SEALs do it. I'm similar to a Navy SEAL.
I'm in.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm like, I want to be like a Navy SEAL, which I'm nothing like in any way. But if I can breathe like them, that's good. So I started doing box breathing and using an app called Breathwork. And that was my exposure to it. And I started to feel better. And I said, let me give this a shot. And went over to the Calm app with a free subscription. And the rest is history. But I can't say enough of how much I support your mission and what you're trying to do in workplaces because it really does help. And not only does it help fix issues that may be occurring, it improves on the back end everything else, that
Hmm.
productivity and innovation, everything you talked about. So um, keep fighting that good fight. I love what you're doing. Keep fighting. It's incredible. I look forward to continuing to follow you on LinkedIn and maybe joining that newsletter if I can and getting in and following your journey.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much for this conversation.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. And everybody, if you enjoyed this episode, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to ask you to comment below, like, subscribe, and comment below something you've learned from this episode. Just one small thing you've learned from this episode. If you are listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, I hope you enjoyed it. Do me a favor, if you did, leave a 5-star review on any of the podcast platforms. If you didn't enjoy it for whatever reason, just keep moving. You don't got to leave that 1-star review. For some reason, people don't like, they can't leave. It's either a 5 or a 1, and they can't like judge in between anywhere. 5 is good. If not, you can move on. So thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed another episode of the Workplace Wonder Lessons from the Experts.